In this demo, we're going to provision file storage. From the main dashboard of the Unity interface, we want to go to the storage section and click on File. You'll notice when we get to the File section, there's four main areas or four tabs across the top. File Systems, SMB shares, NFS shares, and NAS servers. The first thing we have to do is we have to create a NAS server. That NAS server is basically the file services server, kind of like a Windows box if you were building it on a Windows server, or a Linux box if you were building just a standalone SMB or NFS server. This will provide that same function. So we want to click on the plus sign to open the Create a NAS Server window. We want to name our server. We're going to call it Server 1. And then from the pool, we want to select the storage tier or the storage pool that we want to make available to this particular storage server. So we're going to say Storage Pool 1 and select Pool. And then we have a drop down for storage processor. If we had multiple storage processors to choose from, we could go ahead and select a different one from a drop down. But since we only have a single storage processor, we're going to leave it as SPA. Let's click Next to continue. From the interface section of the wizard, we have a Configure NAS Server address. You'll notice there's an Ethernet port drop-down, and from that drop-down you can select the Ethernet ports that are available and configured for this Unity VSA. We're going to leave it at Ethernet port 0 for our configuration, and we're going to type in an address of 192.168.0.107. Then for the subnet, we're going to make that a 255.255.255.0, a Class C, and then for the gateway, it's 192.168.0.250. For this particular interface, if we had multiple VLANs that were trunked to it, we would click on the Edit link here, and we would go ahead and select a different VLAN ID than the default, which is basically null or 0. But since we don't have multiple addresses or multiple VLANs available for this particular interface, we're going to go ahead and click Next to continue. Under sharing protocols, we have a couple different options. We have multi-protocol, Windows shares, Linux, Unix shares. For our configuration, we're going to select Windows shares. If you wanted to make it available to both Linux, Unix, and Windows machines, you would go ahead and select the multi-protocol. That'd be the best option available to you. But since we don't have that, we're going to select Windows shares. And then for our config, we're going to select standalone. If you're going to join this to an Active Directory domain, though, here's where you'd put in the SMB computer name, the domain name, and also put in the credentials that you would want to use to connect up and join it to the domain. We're going to select standalone, and we're going to create a NetBIOS name. We're going to call it Server 1. The work group is just going to be home. Administrator password is just a simple password that we're going to use, the same as on the VSA. Password 123 hash mark. And we're going to click Next to continue. Here, if we were doing Unix services or connecting to a Unix directory services server, we'd go ahead and enable it and we'd configure the NIS settings at this point. Since we are not, we're going to go ahead and click Next to continue. We could also configure NAS server DNS. So if we click that checkbox, we'd select the domain and we'd select the servers that we'd want to do DNS lookups with. But since we don't have this in an Active Directory domain, we have it in a work group, we're going to deselect Enable DNS and click Next. From a replication standpoint, this is just like what we did for block. We can enable replication, set asynchronous replication, set the RPO, and then we can also make additional configurations to the destination. Since we've already done this previously, we're not going to spend the time here. If you need additional help, use the Help section to configure your replication. The Summary tab, just like all the other wizards in the Unity VSA, displays our current configuration as we've done it so far. And if everything looks good, we're going to click Finish. After we've clicked Finish, we're going to wait for our results to update, and it's going to give us a status of 100% successful. Once the creation of the NAS server is complete, go ahead and click the Close button. You'll notice when we return to the interface, we have our server here listed, Server 1, and it has our additional information here on the right about it. Storage pool, IP address, protocols, file systems, and so on. So the next thing we need to create is a file system. So with the tabs across the top, we want to find the one labeled File Systems and click on it. When the screen refreshes, you'll notice we don't have any file systems on this particular NAS server. So let's go ahead and click the plus sign to open the wizard. The Create a File System wizard starts off by limiting our selection of protocols that are available to us. You'll notice that Windows Shares is the only one available because during our NAS server creation, we only made Windows Shares available as part of that server. So now from the NAS server list, we want to click on the drop-down box and we want to select Server 1 and click the Select NAS Server button. We have the option to hit Advanced and we can see several different things here. Sync writes enabled, op locks enabled, notify on write enabled, notify on access enabled. Depending on the requirements of your environment, you may choose to enable or disable some of these features. Normally, you do not need to modify any of the advanced settings in any way, shape, or form. So we're going to go ahead and close this dialog box and we're going to click on the Next button. We're going to create a name for our file system. In this case, we're just going to call it FS1. And if we want to apply a description, we sure can. We're going to go ahead and skip that step here and click the Next. Now we select a storage pool to put this file system. We're going to select the storage pool 1 because that is our only storage pool that we made available. And we're going to go ahead and just make it 7 gig in size. We also have a tiering policy down here that gives us the option to change how the files are stored on disk. So here we're going to start high and then auto tier. That means that when it first comes into the system, it's going to start at the highest speed possible and then auto tier down lower. We could set auto tier, highest available tier, or lowest tier, but we're going to leave it at the default and click Next. On the Shares screen, we have the option to go ahead and enable the SMB share and create it and make it available to our file system and to our NAS server. We could do this separately by using the SMB Shares tab in the Unisphere interface if we wish to. But since we're going to go ahead and save this step, we're going to click the SMB share and we're going to name this. We're going to call this Share 1, and you'll notice it shows our local path below our SMB share path as well. Let's click Next to continue, and we're presented with SMB Share's other settings. So we can do continuous availability, protocol encryption, access-based enumeration, or ABE, and branch cache enabled. We also have offline availability. You can make these configuration setting changes as you wish to fit your environment's needs. One that is pretty common is to enable access-based enumeration, and the other is to set offline availability to programs and files opened by users or programs and files opened by users optimized for performance. So we can go ahead and set both of those in our config and click Next. Snapshots are a lot more important on file compared to block. With snapshots on file, you have the ability to essentially do basic backup capability. It's a very limited functionality, but for a remote office, it would work really, really well for fast restores. So let's go ahead and enable automatic backups. We're going to keep the default protection schedule. We could set a new one if we wished, but our default is every day at 2 a.m. We're going to take a snapshot and we're going to retain the snapshot for 2 days. Let's click Next to continue. Again, just like we've talked before about replication, you can configure that here. Our summary, similar to any other wizard in the Unisphere interface. We can see the configuration changes we've made, and then finally we can click Finish. When the file system creation is complete, you'll see 100% complete and a green notification. Go ahead and click Close to get out of the wizard. When we return to the primary Unisphere interface, you can see our file system is listed here, what NAS server belongs to, the pool that it belongs to, as well as additional information around snapshots and capacity usage on the right. We're going to click on the SMB Shares tab just so you can see that during that file system creation wizard, we had the ability to set up that share. We see that share listed in the SMB Shares section as it correlates to the SMB share that was created during the file system generation. That completes the file provisioning of a Unity VSA. So let's do a course recap. We got to know Unity. We found out about the family of Unity, what the capabilities were, what some of the ranges of the different platforms were. We identified use cases for the Unity VSA specifically. We described the management interfaces available for you. We did a deploy and configuration of the Unity VSA into a VMware environment. We've performed basic administration, which included DNS configuration, time servers, and the like. We then performed provisioning on the platform, which included block and file. Thank you very much for participating in the Unity VSA course. I appreciate your time. Hopefully it was time well spent and you know more about software-defined storage now that you've completed. Thank you very much.